You are not unaware of your worth, you are ignoring it in real time. And the way you treat yourself every day proves it more than anything you say. You scroll, you delay, you hesitate on decisions that should be obvious if you actually valued your time and attention. And yet, you still tell yourself you're figuring things out. Look at what just happened today. You had something important in mind. A task. A decision. A move you know would improve your life. But instead of acting, you checked something easier. Something irrelevant. Something that didn't challenge you. Just a few minutes lost, again. And you didn't question it. You justified it. That's the pattern most people never see. Because it doesn't feel like self-disrespect in the moment, it feels like normal behavior. But zoom out, and it becomes clear. You are constantly choosing what is comfortable over what is valuable. And every time you do that, you lower the internal standard of what you think you deserve. This is where most people lie to themselves. They think worth is something you have. But in reality, worth is something you either reinforce or weaken through action. Not once, not occasionally, but repeatedly. And right now, your daily behavior is answering a question you never consciously asked: how much do I settle for? And the answer is being written quietly, every day. Not in words. In choices. What you're dealing with is not a lack of awareness, it's a breakdown in internal alignment. You already know more than enough. The issue is what happens after you know. There are 4 internal mechanisms quietly shaping your behavior. 1. Self-deception loop. You know what matters, but you slightly distort it to make avoidance feel acceptable. It's not the right time. I'll do it when I'm more focused. This is not logic, it's emotional protection dressed as reasoning. 2. Avoidance loop. Once discomfort appears, your mind doesn't debate, it redirects. You switch tasks, reduce effort, or delay the decision entirely, not because you forgot the goal, but because you felt resistance. 3. Emotional negotiation. This is where discipline breaks quietly. You start making deals with yourself, just a short break. 1 episode. I'll start after I reset my mind. And every deal lowers the cost of avoidance. 4. Discipline failure cycle. These 3 combine into a repeating system: discomfort, avoidance, temporary relief, delayed consequence, repeat. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just repetition. And here's where it becomes personal. You don't fall behind in one moment. You fall behind in hundreds of small negotiations that felt harmless at the time. Example. You sit down to work on something important. You feel a bit of pressure. Slight uncertainty. Instead of staying with it, you check your phone just for a minute. That minute doesn't feel like anything. But it resets your focus, weakens your intent, and silently teaches your mind that discomfort is optional. That's the system. Not lack of ability. Not lack of knowledge. But repeated permission to escape effort. And the more often you escape, the more normal it becomes. Which means the real problem is not what you don't know. It's what you keep allowing. 1. Worth is proven in moments of resistance. Your sense of worth is not shaped in big events. It is shaped in small moments where you feel resistance and decide what to do next. That is where identity is built. Not in planning. Not in intention. In reaction. Because every time you face discomfort and choose the easier path, you send a message to yourself: this is acceptable for me. And over time, that message becomes your baseline. This is where most people lie to themselves. They think worth is a belief system, something you affirm or remind yourself of. But worth is actually a behavioral record. It is what you repeatedly tolerate. Here is a simple scenario. You know you need to improve your life in a certain area: health, finances, skill, discipline. You don't disagree with it. You understand it clearly. But when the moment comes to act, there is resistance. Not extreme resistance. Just enough to create hesitation. And instead of pushing through it, you delay. Not because you don't care, but because in that moment, comfort feels more immediate than growth. That decision feels small, but it is not small in effect. Because every repetition of that choice strengthens a version of you that reacts the same way next time. And that version of you slowly becomes your identity. Not through dramatic failure, but through consistent avoidance. You don't lose your worth. You stop reinforcing it. And that difference changes everything. 2. You are trained to choose immediate relief over delayed value. There is a pattern most people never consciously notice. Your brain does not naturally prioritize your long-term life. It prioritizes emotional relief. So when discomfort appears, your system automatically looks for the fastest way to reduce it. Not solve it. Reduce it. That is why avoidance feels so natural. It is not random, it is predictable conditioning. And this is where the problem becomes structural. Because every time you choose relief, you reinforce the same decision pathway. Discomfort, escape, relief, repetition. And the more you repeat it, the more automatic it becomes. This is the part you ignore every day. You think you are making decisions each time. But in reality, you are often repeating a learned response. For example, you open your laptop to do something important. You feel slight friction. Not pain. Just resistance. Instead of staying with it, you switch to something easier. Messages. Videos. Minor tasks. It feels harmless. But what actually happens is subtle. You train your attention to move away from difficulty, not toward mastery. So next time, the resistance doesn't feel smaller, it feels more influential. And that's how control is lost quietly. Not in failure, but in repetition of escape. You are not choosing laziness. You are reinforcing a reflex. And reflexes become identity faster than decisions do. 3. Self-respect is not a feeling, it is enforcement. One of the most misunderstood ideas is self-respect. People treat it like an internal feeling, but it is not. Self-respect is enforcement of your own standards, especially when no one is watching. If there is no enforcement, there is no respect. Only intention. And intention without enforcement always collapses under pressure. Here's where the breakdown happens. You set a standard for yourself. Something simple, clear, reasonable. Then life introduces resistance. A tired morning, a difficult task, a moment of uncertainty. And instead of enforcing the standard, you adjust it. Just slightly. This one time doesn't matter. But it always matters in accumulation. Because every adjustment weakens the authority of your own rules. And once that authority is weakened, discipline stops being stable. It becomes situational. And situational discipline is not discipline at all. It is preference. A grounded example. Someone decides they will focus deeply for a set period each day. But on a stressful day, they shorten it. Then on another day, they skip it. Nothing dramatic happens. No immediate consequence appears. But internally, something changes. The rule becomes negotiable. And once a rule becomes negotiable, it loses power. Success is nothing more than a few simple disciplines practiced every day. Jim Rohn. But the key word is practiced, not planned. Not hoped. Not adjusted based on mood. Practiced. And practice only exists where enforcement is consistent. At this point, stop and look at the pattern honestly. You are not lacking discipline. You are allowing exceptions that slowly dissolve it. That is the real shift most people never confront. At this stage, the pattern is no longer hidden behind explanation. It is visible in repetition. You don't need more insight, You need alignment between what you know and what you allow yourself to do. Because knowledge without enforcement has no impact on your life. It only creates awareness without change. And that gap is where frustration grows. Not because you lack capability, but because your behavior doesn't consistently match your understanding. This is where identity starts to form in a stable way. Not from ambition, not from goals, but from repeated responses under pressure. Every time you face resistance and choose the easier option, you are not just avoiding effort, you are shaping a pattern of self-interruption. And over time, that pattern becomes familiar. Familiarity feels like who you are, even when it contradicts what you want. This is the quiet shift most people never question. They think change requires a breakthrough moment. But in reality, change is built or lost in ordinary decisions that feel too small to matter. You already know this. But knowing is not the issue anymore. Execution is. And execution is not about motivation, it is about enforcement. Self-respect starts where negotiation ends. Because every time you negotiate with your own standards, you weaken the structure that holds your behavior together. There is no external punishment for this. No immediate consequence. Which is why it continues. But internally, something compounds. Each unkept standard reduces trust in your own direction. And without that trust, discipline becomes unstable. Not because you lack discipline, but because you keep allowing exceptions that erode it quietly. Responsibility in this context is not emotional weight. It is structural ownership. Understanding that your current position is the result of what you have repeatedly permitted. And if it was built through repetition, it can only change through repetition in the opposite direction. Not intensity. Not temporary effort. But consistency under resistance. That is where identity shifts. Not when it is easy, but when it is enforced even when it is not. Nothing changes from this point because you finally understand something new. It changes because you stop negotiating with what you already understand. There is a difference between insight and embodiment. Insight explains. Embodiment repeats. And your life has been shaped far more by repetition than realization. At this level, there is no need for emotional intensity. Because the truth is not complicated. You either enforce your standards or you slowly erase them. Not in one decision. In many small ones that feel harmless. That is why nothing dramatic is required to fix this. No new identity needs to be invented. Only consistency needs to be restored. Because the version of you that you respect is not built through inspiration, it is built through follow-through when it would be easier not to. And that is where most people quietly split from their own expectations. They know what matters. They recognize it clearly. But when the moment arrives, they allow exceptions. And those exceptions accumulate into a life that feels slightly out of alignment. Not broken. Just off-center. Self-respect, in its simplest form, is not how you think about yourself. It is how strictly you behave according to what you said matters. Nothing more complicated than that. And once that is understood clearly, there is nothing left to search for. Only a decision that either continues the pattern or interrupts it.